Before the Ukraine war started, Russia reveled in its reputation as one of the world's most powerful military nations. Its weapons, it was thought, were among the best that anybody outside of the US produced. Russia earned billions of dollars from weapons sales, all while pushing the idea that what it built was powerful, lethal, unstoppable. Ukraine just proved Russia wrong. During a pair of strikes conducted in late September, Russia's unstoppable weapons were wiped off the map. Ukraine destroyed them all, with the strikes likely to impact in two key areas of the war. We start with a trip to the Crimean Peninsula and the air defense system Russia claims is among the very best the world has to offer, the S400. Touted as a system that can take out almost any aerial threat, the S400 is one of Russia's most important weapons when it comes to defending its position in Crimea. But thanks to Ukraine, one of those S400s is now out of commission. Ukraine didn't attack the S400 itself. That would be foolhardy. The S400 comes loaded with missiles that can take out slow-moving drones and other projectiles, so a head-on assault isn't ideal. Such an assault can still work, especially when using a horde of projectiles that make it impossible for the S400 to destroy everything. But Ukraine is smarter than that. Why use a horde, which costs money and contains drones that could be used elsewhere, when you could use a single drone to render Russia's S400 obsolete? Don't attack the S400, attack its radar. That's the approach Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, or SSO, took on September 30th when it destroyed a radar station linked to one of Russia's S-400 air defense systems, the Kyiv Post reports. That station serves as the eyes for the S-400, allowing the system to detect and then fire upon incoming threats. If you take away the eyes, the S-400 can only fire blindly into the air, assuming it can fire at all. In air defense, where precision is the name of the game due to the need to deal with fast-moving targets, blind firing is the last thing Russia wants to do with its expensive S-400 missiles. Ukraine's clever and precise strike just took out an S-400's entire combat capability without Ukraine having to sacrifice drones to a head-on assault. And the SSO is more than happy to talk about it. Taking to Telegram to announce Ukraine's latest strike, the SSO said, "On the night of September 30th, units of the Special Operations Forces hit the radar station of the S-400 Triumph anti-aircraft missile system." Ukraine's strike also delivered no small sense of irony and symbolism, as the SSO added, "It's symbolic that the enemy's expensive air defense system, aimed in particular at UAVs, was neutralized by SSO strike drones," the SSO says on Telegram. The radar station is the eyes of the S-400 Triumph complex. Without the observation and guidance element, the entire system loses its combat capability. Ukraine just disabled an S-400 with the very weapon the S-400 is supposed to counter. Beyond this statement, the SSO didn't provide much more information. No photographs or footage of the strike have been shared, which also makes it impossible to determine where in Crimea Ukraine took out the S-400 radar station. However, there are some possible hints. In the wake of the SSO's strike, the Crimean Wind Telegram channel shared that explosions had been heard in a couple of districts during the early hours of the morning of September 30th. That explains the explosions our subscribers heard last night, the channel reports. The Kyiv Post adds that the subscribers that Crimean Wind mentions had reported loud explosions in the Leninsky and Feodosia districts of the peninsula. Were these explosions related to Ukraine's drones decimating an S-400 radar station? And if they were, does that mean Ukraine carried out more than one attack on Crimea on September 30th? Unfortunately, we don't have the answers to these questions because the SSO doesn't want to give anything more away than it already has. It would rather leave Russia guessing about what it's just done and what it plans to do next. Of course, we don't have to guess too much about why Ukraine needs to take out as many S-400s as possible. The system represents one of the most vital parts of Russia's air defense strategy. Missile Threat provides the basic information that highlights why the S-400 is such an important weapon for Russia. It's a surface-to-air missile system that is highly mobile and capable of engaging almost any aerial target. That includes drones, cruise missiles, aircraft, and even ballistic missiles that have reached the terminal phase of their descent toward a target. Some of the system's missiles can travel for up to 400 kilometers or around 250 miles, though others are more limited in range. Russia also has the choice of using the 48N6 missile, which hosts a 143 kilogram or 315 pound high-explosive fragmentation warhead, or the 77N6. That second missile has a warhead that weighs the same as the one used in the 48N6, but it has hit-to-kill properties rather than being a typical high-explosive warhead. Up until 2021, which saw the introduction of the S-500, the S-400 was Russia's most advanced air defense system. The Kyiv Post says that the system is even supposed to be comparable to the US Patriot. which Ukraine has used extensively to tackle Russian airstrikes. This may not be the most accurate comparison, as the Patriot has performed better than the S-400 during the war. However, the basic functionality seems similar. S-400s have radar stations, as we already know, launchers, and systems capable of automatically detecting and designating targets. These systems, down to each missile selection and launch, are supposedly fully automated. The S-400 also seems to be somewhat modular. According to the Kyiv Post, an S-400 system can operate up to 40 launchers, though it doesn't have to use that many. Each of these launchers can hold 4 missiles, providing a total of 160 missiles for a full S-400 unit. The S-400's radar and tracking systems can also identify and order strikes on up to 80 targets simultaneously, with each of those targets getting a double dose of missiles. It's all impressive stuff, and these specifications also prove our earlier point that using a drone horde to hit an S-400 head-on isn't the most economical idea. It can work as long as the horde has at least 80 drones. Any less than that, and Ukraine would run the risk of losing all of its drones before any of them scored a direct hit. Hence the strike on the radar station. Taking out that single station means that Russia now has up to 160 S-400 missiles installed in launchers that are practically useless. So Ukraine took out an air defense system that was supposed to be unstoppable. Here's why that matters. The S-400 that Ukraine just disabled is based in Crimea, which is home to several of these systems along its northwestern coast. That shows you how much Vladimir Putin values Crimea. Each S-400 costs anywhere between $200 million and $1.2 billion, depending on who you listen to. Even at the lower end of the price scale, this is a very expensive system, which highlights both its supposed power and just how important Crimea is to Putin. However, Putin sending so many S-400s to Crimea is a problem for Russia. The first indication of that problem came in May, when Pravda reported on the Ukrainian Navy's claims that Russia was pulling more of its air defenses to Crimea. The Navy spokesperson, Dmitry Pletenchuk, outlined an emerging issue for Russia that Putin either wasn't aware of or didn't seem to care about. Crimea is valuable to Russia both symbolically and logistically, Pletenchuk said. The density of air defense systems on the island is greater than it is in many Russian regions. The Russians are limited in their ability to replenish their losses due to the sanctions and lack of microelectronics. In other words, Putin is creating blind spots by moving so many of Russia's air defenses to Crimea. Fast forward to September, and Ukraine has started taking advantage of these blind spots. We published an in-depth video covering how, so check it out if you want to learn more about how Putin's obsession with Crimea is putting the Russian mainland at greater risk. Now, think about this. Pletenchuk noted that Russia is struggling to build or maintain its air defense systems due to sanctions limiting its ability to get its hands on the required components and microelectronics. An S-400 radar station would almost certainly fall within that category of things that Russia is struggling to build at the moment. So, Ukraine taking out an S-400 radar station in Crimea isn't just about weakening Russia's hold on the peninsula, as we'll get into in a moment. It's about weakening the Russian mainland. Putin's obsession with holding onto Crimea is such that he's likely to prioritize the replacement of the destroyed radar station. Given that a repair is likely impossible, that means he's going to have to take a radar station from another S-400 and send it to Crimea. Of course, the S-400 that loses its radar station becomes as blind as the one that Ukraine just struck. Putin will end up sacrificing air defenses somewhere else in Russia to maintain Crimea's strength. That creates gaps. And in gaps, Ukraine sees opportunities to conduct more of the long-range strikes with which it has battered Russia throughout 2025. Let's come back to Russia's weakened hold on Crimea. This has been an issue for Putin for some time, as Ukraine has focused strike after strike on Crimea's air defenses and military installations. For instance, late August into early September alone saw Ukraine take out 6 pieces of Russian equipment in the space of a few days. All were in Crimea. All were valuable to Russia, and you can find out more about them in our video covering Ukraine's devastating series of strikes. These sorts of strikes are part of what the Atlantic Council called a slow and steady weakening of Russia's grip on Crimea back in October 2024. Even over a year ago, Ukraine was striking targets of great military importance in Crimea, the outlet says. Combining those strikes with attacks on the Black Sea Fleet that have rendered that once feared assortment of ships practically useless, and you get a strategy of chipping away at the Crimean armor. Putin ends up in a catch-22 situation. Either he weakens mainland Russia by replacing destroyed equipment in Crimea, or he loosens his grip on Crimea by keeping that equipment, which is needed to guard against strikes on the Russian mainland where it is. This is a no-win situation for Russia because Ukraine gets what it wants either way. Ukraine can take steps closer to Crimea or conduct more strikes against refineries and other military assets inside Russia. Still, Putin might think, Russia can at least maintain the strength of its offensive inside Ukraine, even with all of these air defense problems. But maybe that isn't the case anymore. Which brings us to the second of the pair of strikes we mentioned in the introduction to the video. This time we head to Kharkiv, which is a region that seems to have been under a non-stop assault by Russia ever since Putin launched his invasion. On September 30th, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine had managed to destroy 2 Russian TOS-1A Salt-Sepyok multiple launch rocket systems, or MLRS, inside Kharkiv. Ukraine's 429th Separate Achilles Drone Regiment carried out the 2 strikes, the outlet says. In both cases, the regiment used drones to get the job done, just as it did in Crimea. And there's footage to prove it. Released to coincide with the September 29th strike, which occurred just hours after Ukraine destroyed the S400 radar station in Crimea, that footage is on YouTube and available to view. Published by the 429th Separate Achilles Drone Regiment itself, the video lasts for about 50 seconds, and it appears to showcase 2 strikes conducted using first-person view or FPV drones. First, we see grainy footage being shot by one of the drones. It's difficult to make anything out until the drone adjusts its course slightly. That's when the target comes into view. One of Russia's Salt-Sepyok MLRS appears, almost seeming illuminated against the much darker backdrop. Ukraine's drone descends, careens towards its target, and then explodes. The video then switches to footage being shot by another FPV drone as it scours the Kharkiv landscape looking for its target. It finds that target pretty quickly. The second Salt-Sepyok MLRS is on the move, but it isn't going fast enough. Ukraine's drone zeroes in and scores a direct hit, taking out the second of Russia's powerful MLRS. All of this is impressive enough, but footage of FPV strikes like this come out of Ukraine almost daily. What about this particular pair of strikes makes them so special? The answer lies in the weapon that Ukraine took out. The Salt-Sepyok MLRS isn't just any rocket launcher. It's a $15 million weapon that is considered legendary inside Russia, the Kyiv Post reports. Oh, and it also happens to be an MLRS that is capable of launching thermobaric rockets, which are among the most devastating of the conventional munitions that Russia has in its arsenal. We'll explain why limiting Russia's use of these dangerous rockets is a major win in a moment. First, let's explore the Salt-Sepyok MLRS in a bit more detail. According to Army recognition, the Salt-Sepyok MLRS is often referred to as a heavy flamethrower, rather than a conventional rocket launcher. It's mobile thanks to being installed on the tank chassis of T-72, and it's designed to offer fire support to assaulting infantry and tank regiments. Its most important feature is its block launcher, which can carry up to 24 220mm guided pipes that allow it to rattle off a veritable mob of rockets and unguided missiles at a target. Crewed by 3 people, the Salt-Sepyok MLRS can reach a top speed of 60 km or 37.2 miles per hour and has a range of 550 km, which amounts to about 341 miles. This mobility means that Russia can deploy its terrifying MLRS for one assault, only to move it on to the next when it's done its job. It's not quite a perfect weapon, though. Despite its supposedly legendary status, the Salt-Sepyok MLRS has several weaknesses, the Kyiv Post points out. Its lack of armor is one of them. The weapon is essentially an MLRS strapped onto the top of a tank chassis, which makes it vulnerable to the same kinds of weapons that have been destroying Russia's tanks during the invasion. Anti-tank missiles and grenade launchers offer threats that are dangerous to a Salt-Sepyok MLRS. Plus, as we've already seen, drones can descend on the MLRS without it being able to do a thing about them. How could it? If the Salt-Sepyok MLRS tries to fire its rockets at Ukraine's drones, there's almost no chance of it scoring a direct hit. Even if it does, Russia really doesn't want it to when Russian troops are in close range. Why? We've already told you. The Salt-Sepyok MLRS launches thermobaric rockets. It's this fact that leads many to designate it as a heavy flamethrower due to how thermobaric weapons work. And it's the system's ability to fire these kinds of rockets that showcases why it's important that Ukraine just destroyed 2 Salt-Sepyok MLRS. Both The Guardian and the BBC explained why thermobaric weapons are so lethal back in 2022. Russia had started using them almost from the outset of the invasion, leading to an outcry over the cruelty of utilizing what is often referred to as a vacuum bomb against Ukraine. The alternative name hints at what happens when a thermobaric weapon detonates. The BBC explains that thermobaric weapons consist of a fuel container and a pair of explosive charges. When the weapon hits its target, the first explosive charge breaks open the fuel container, scattering its contents into the surrounding environment as a cloud. Then, the second explosion happens. That second explosion detonates the entire cloud, which is capable of seeping into buildings and defenses that aren't totally sealed. A massive fireball erupts, scorching anything unlucky enough to be caught inside. As if that wasn't enough, this huge fireball sucks up all of the oxygen from the surrounding area, creating the vacuum that gives the weapon its nickname. The fireball doesn't get you, the lack of oxygen will. These devastating effects make thermobaric weapons controversial, as they're much more damaging to structures and human life than a regular explosive. And Russia loves using them. Speaking to The Guardian in March 2022, Australian Strategic Policy Institute senior analyst Dr. Marcus Hellier said, "One of the things we know about Russian tactics is that they are willing to destroy everything." He added, "It's clear that the Ukrainians are hunkering down in some of the cities. As that continues, the Russians are going to resort more and more to using whatever weapons they have, including thermobaric weapons in built-up urban areas. Kharkiv is one of those cities where Ukrainian soldiers and civilians have hunkered down since the war began. Perhaps it's no coincidence that 2 Salt-Sepyok MLRS were in the Kharkiv region. Now neither can launch the thermobaric rockets Russia has used in Kharkiv in the past, which relieves a lot of pressure on Ukraine. After all, Kharkiv is still a target for Russia. Putin may have claimed that it isn't. Back in May 2024, Russia's leader lied through his teeth by claiming that he wasn't interested in capturing Kharkiv. In a quote published by Politico at the time, Putin even blamed Ukraine for Russia's constant assaults on Kharkiv. "When it comes to what is happening around Kharkiv, that's their fault too," Putin claimed, "because they have been shelling and sadly continue to target residential neighborhoods in the border areas including Belgorod. And I've said publicly that if this will continue, we'll be forced to create a safe zone, a sanitary zone. That's what we are doing. It's not about capturing Kharkiv," Putin claimed. "It was about protecting Russia's border regions." That's a flimsy justification for what Russia is doing in Kharkiv. Now that we're in 2025, Russia's strikes aren't relenting. The presence of 2 Salt-Sepyok MLRS in the region tells us exactly what Russia had in store if Ukraine's FPV drones hadn't taken those rocket systems out. Kharkiv is also regularly a victim of Russia's airstrikes. In June, one of these strikes, which involved the use of drones, guided bombs and missiles, killed at least 4 people in the city. The reality is that Russia wants Kharkiv. Thanks to Ukraine's drone attack, taking that city has just become a whole lot harder. Add the loss of a key air defense system in Crimea, and you get a bad couple of days for Russia. Putin's grip on Crimea has been weakened, as has his ability to assault Kharkiv. As for Ukraine, its drones have just claimed a trio of supposedly unstoppable weapons. Just days before these 2 strikes, Ukraine went from taking out the unstoppable to doing the impossible. Using a $500 weapon, it destroyed a Russian gunship worth $10 million. Find out how in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest drone attacks against Russian military assets. And thank you for watching.